Okay.
Welcome, everybody. We are going to begin and we'll let Lisa sit down. Because it might be awkward if we all stand up, start saying the pledge, and she's trying to help people. Thank you for coming, everybody.
Did you get the modification to the agenda? Did Alicia catch it? We just need when we get to approve the agenda.
Okay, let's start with the pledge. Flag's over here today.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And we need to approve the agenda right off the bat?
Yeah,
Okay,
and then if I could
yes,
speak to it.
yes, go ahead. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda, or do you want to speak
If
to
I
it
could
first?
speak to it.
Please,
first,
go ahead.
to-
Go ahead.
When we presented the public budget hearing in the newspaper and in our other published areas, it was published as an amended fiscal year 2022 and then the proposed fiscal year 2023. We just need to make sure that it's clear that that budget hearing is for both of those items, as was stated in our public notices. And then when an action item comes, we'll need an action item for that includes both of those.
The
The
amended,
amended fiscal year 2022
and then the
proposed
budget.
fiscal year 2023. The amended part didn't get into the agenda, but it was everywhere else. So.
Okay. Yes, I'll write that down. Yep. All right, now, is that it?
Mhm.
I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Do we approve that with next
With
week?
with the changes that
Okay, I
we,
move to approve the agenda under the auspices of the amended fiscal year 2022 and the proposed fiscal year 2023 being changed in the verbiage.
Right.
Second that.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. And we are into the public budget hearing. Do we want Alicia? You are up. That.
So we'll just jump right in. We're going to review the FY 2022 amended budget. It's just kind of a formality, but our variances were off enough that it requires us to do so. So the FY 2022 amended budget, when we initially set our budget, we budgeted at 199.5 support units. We actually qualified for 212 support units, just over. Our salary-based apportionment thus increased from $16,148,899 to $16,370,406. Our state discretionary monies increased from $5,893,629 to just over $6.2 million. So our total funding increase was just shy of $600,000. Our total revenue for the FY 22 came in at $28,949,252. With that, our projected expenditures. Salaries were at $16.4 million, with the respective benefits at $4.9 million. Purchase services, $3.8 million. Supplies and materials, $966,000. Capital outlay and equipment, $269,765. Cost for insurance, this is our building and professional liability, was $135,982. I'm projecting that we're going to transfer a little bit of money out of our general fund to cover other funds, mainly our CTE program of about $25,000. Our contingency reserve was right at 5% for $1.4 million. And we had an unappropriated balance of $830,150. Let me pause here and explain the unappropriated balance. This really truly is just simply unexpected revenue or the revenue we received that we didn't have budgeted or expended throughout our general fund. So it's unappropriated. So our total expenditures were $28,119,102. And I'm projecting a general fund balance carryover into next year, or FY23, of $2.2 million.
Could you address just about what that is as an increase or decrease from the previous year?
Yes, most definitely. Last year's carryover ending balance was $2,051,000. So we're right in line with what we had last year, slightly more, probably just simply because of the revenue that we increased. Any questions so far? Okay. All right, let's jump into FY 2023 proposed budget. This budget is built on the 212 support units. Our beginning balance is that $2.2 million carryover that I'm projecting. Local revenue, this is our taxes for our supplemental levy, penalties and interest, and any type of earnings on our current investments are $1.7 million. State revenue, the salary-based apportionment, I calculated at $17.9 million. Our state discretionary monies will be $7.6 million. And other state revenue, all of the little funds the state sends us, will be $2.7 million. For a total state revenue of $28.2 million. Total revenue across our general fund will then be $32.3 million. Any questions on revenue so far? Thank you. On to our expenditures. Salaries, projecting $17.5 million. Respective benefits of just of all of our professional and contracted services, such as legal, auditing, all of our special ed certifications that are mandated by IEPs, and any building system needs, such as plumbing, electrical, or equipment repairs. Cost increase from last year to this new year will be $371,752, or a 9.7% increase. Supplies and materials, in this category, this is where we pay for all of our supplies and materials that are needed to implement the lessons within the classroom, such as paper, art supplies, science supplies, etc. It also includes all the parts and supplies to replace and or repair any building equipment and or building systems. All of the custodial supplies, including all cleaning, disinfecting supplies, paper towels, and other necessary items are paid out of here. The cost increase from this last year to the new year will be $432,286, or a 44.7% increase. Capital outlay and equipment.
Inflation.
This includes items such as all classroom furnishings, such as desks, chairs, tables, and storage. It also includes technology equipment, such as laptops, computers, projectors for staff and students. It includes HVAC units. Also includes any ground maintenance equipment. Total cost from FY22 to FY23 will be $30,235, or an 11.2% increase from last year. Insurance, this is our professional liability and our building property insurance. The cost increase was $12,238, or a 9% increase from last year to this new year. Contingency reserve. Per our district policy, we are to budget no less than 5% per year. So from FY22 to FY23 was an increase of $168,729, or an 11.5% increase in our contingency reserve. This is a typo, and I apologize. I shouldn't have said FY 2022 because it's also FY 2023. This is other funds. So the general fund is our major primary operating fund, but we have several little funds that come with this budget, which is all of our local and state funds, which include special grants, driver's education, career technical education, technology, safe and drug-free, and our bond redemption fund. It also includes all of our federal funds, such as title funds, IDEA funds, the ESSER funds, Carl Perkins, and Child Nutrition Program. In FY22, we had a total budget of $14,981,297. In FY 2023, the proposed budget cumulative across all the funds are $13,057,003. This is a total decrease in other funds of $1,924,294, or 12.8% decrease. Let me explain the decrease here. We have utilized all of our CARES Act monies. That's the first round of ESSER 1, and we've used a big chunk of our ESSER 2 dollars. So that was the reason for the decrease. Those are one-time monies. We don't expect them next year. Does anyone have any questions?
Can you start?
You guys have any questions?
No? I have a pretty extensive review earlier, so.
Did you raise your hand?
We do have someone in the audience.
To a point of order, if I could.
Yes.
I'm new, I'm from Arizona, and just new to the community, and I'm not sure your protocol. So where I come from, when you're doing budgets for the public can interact and ask questions and not wait for the public comment, because you vote and then it's too late. So
Got it.
am I out of line to ask my questions?
You're ready to go.
Okay,
Yep.
good. One of them that, well, there's a 9% increase in insurance, and I was wondering why. Are you talking about medical health insurance for employees or school district property or what?
Yes, school district property and professional liability, we had a 9% increase.
Okay. And so I'm not used to seeing a salary for the board. The board is paid a salary.
No, no. It would be nice.
My apologies.
No, it's okay.
It says Board of Education, it's like 58,000. I was wondering what that was.
That's the total line item for their budget for that category of what it costs the district to operate the Board of Education. There's one small salary out of it, and it's the board clerk.
Okay, okay. All right. Attorney fees, I didn't see anything. I don't know where you categorize that.
Board of Education, purchase services.
Pardon me?
Board of Education, purchase services.
Okay, okay, good. So do you have an attorney on retainer, or do you have an attorney in-house?
On retainer.
On retainer.
Anderson, Julian, and Hull.
Pardon me?
Anderson, Julian, and Hull is and they are also the primary attorneys, legal counsel for our insurance company, which is the Idaho,
Okay.
that's ICRIM, but Idaho counties, but the series of Idaho counties that have the
So
same
you belong
insurance.
to
I
Idaho
crimp.
Trust.
Yes.
We don't know the
And have your own
acronym.
retainer for an attorney. Okay, so,
Idaho counties.
oh, I know. So teachers are receiving a 5% increase in salary of the base. What is the base?
The base, we went from 40,500 to 42,120.
So I guess my concern would be that to the board would be, with that 5% increase and all the increases in the prices of insurance, whatever that amounts to $166 a month for teachers. So I don't know if the board can ever adjust its reserve to do more for salaries. Are you have it in policy, it has to be 5%? If you go over like 6.5, how do you handle that?
So Idaho code states we cannot
Yeah.
exceed 5%
Okay,
to put aside for contingency reserve. Our policy does state that we should work towards our budgeting, within our budgeting, to try to achieve that. And if we don't, we have to create a plan to reach that.
so.
Madam Chair, could I address that as well?
Yes, please.
And you're speaking on the 5%, were you speaking specifically of 5% contingency or the 5% increase on the base?
Well, according to the slide, it was 5% on the base.
Correct.
So I assume base salary.
So that is actually a negotiated item between the district and the Middleton Education Association. And so what we end up doing, there's actually more that teachers are getting beyond what was stated there. Some of those have cash benefits, others have non-cash benefits. And we can go into a little bit more, but there'll be a big discussion later in this meeting because we're approving the negotiated agreement for the next year. So for instance, Another thing that our teachers will be getting this year is about a $1,500 bonus that will come, that hasn't been coming in past years. In addition, with the insurance, we've lowered the overall cost of insurance, about $175 per employee per month, which is outside of that 5% that's, we're talking about.
Bonus is also outside the 5%.
Yes,
Yes.
bonus is outside the 5%. We've added leadership premiums, which doesn't go across the board to all, but what do we have, about 2/3 of our staff that qualified and applied for those leadership premiums, which is another $900 to $1,800 depending on what role they play. So there are a number of different areas that we'll be addressing that as well, that we negotiate with our education association.
So 2 questions on that.
Please.
Do you have binding arbitration?
What was that?
Do you have binding arbitration in a contract? Like in Arizona, we don't. We're a right to work state. We don't have binding arbitration. We
No.
only
We're a right to
prefer,
work.
but nothing's binding.
We're right to work.
We're right.
We're right to work,
We're right
So
to
you
work.
don't have a binding arbitration contract?
No.
Okay. And I've got the other.
Okay.
So I'll ask you later.
Perfect, anytime. And then that was just on that one question. I didn't know if you had
No,
more
I appreciate
questions.
the clarification. Thank you very much for that.
Anybody else?
Oh, I know it was. The $1,500 that you
Yes.
talked about for teachers, is that sustainable year after year after year?
That's-
or is
Right
that
now, that
one-time
is a
shot?
one-time.
One-time
That is
shot?
one time.
From the
this year.
state, yeah.
And that's direct. The state is giving us those funds. They account for about 92-95% of our staff, and the district is kicking in the rest for the remainder of the certified staff. But that is a one-time thing, and so that's another piece that we'll certainly be addressing next year during our negotiated agreement.
So what's your retention rate?
Let's see, we have a turnover of, how many this year total? I asked Lisa, she's our HR rep.
21 total staff, so we're right about 5%, so 95% retention.
95% retention?
And that's been improving over the last 2 or 3 years.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your
Yeah.
information.
We're ready to move on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Alicia. So, moving on to an action item. I would entertain a motion to approve the fiscal year 2023 budget. Do we need to do the, and the
You can put
2022?
them in the same motion.
Gotcha.
I'll make a motion to approve the 2022-2023 fiscal budget.
The amended 2022.
Oh, the amended,
22
excuse me,
and the
Yep.
proposed.
and the proposed budget for 2023.
I'll second it.
Very good. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Got that, Gina? Thank you. And we will close the public budget hearing and move on to the consent agenda.
Madam Chairman,
Yes,
before you move on to the consent agenda, I have a conflict of interest in the consent agenda, and I'd like to recuse myself.
thank you. Is there any motion to approve the consent agenda? I would entertain one.
Move to approve the consent agenda. I just wanted to give Derek a chance.
I second it.
Okay, is there any discussion on that? Does anybody have any questions? No? All right, all those in favor say aye. Aye.
All right.
All right, we're good. 4-0. Cindy's recused herself. Thank you. Do we have any signed in visitors? Mrs. Pennington.
Just those that wanted to speak, and then do we have any questions that you would?
Not at this time.
Okay, thank you. And then you can indicate you have a question because.
No, I got my agenda.
Okay.
I'm okay.
We're good? Okay. We will move on to discussion items. Good news story?
It's me.
That is you.
Here's the good news.
So, two different things we wanted to report out tonight. We are preliminarily getting some of our state testing results back. And what we can speak to tonight, and we'll go much more in depth in July, Mrs. Goodson will come back and share some information, is that we are meeting some of our goals and achieving above the state average at this point. And so both in math and ELA, we're above the state average between 4 and 5% preliminarily is what we're seeing.
Nice.
Now, within those data ranges, remember the state still needs to do some data scrubbing and adjust, and that's what we'll come back to you in July with, but that's what we're seeing so far. And so that was in both areas, math and ELA. And then the other piece that we wanted to report on, obviously graduation happened, 2 weeks ago now, at the high school. All high school seniors who started the school year, all but one graduated. And so that's a huge accomplishment. And then at our alternative school, we're projecting with the cohort rate close to an 80% graduation rate this coming year. And so that's a huge increase from 3 years ago. That rolling average of the state qualifies is increasing. We're looking at projecting to possibly get out of graduation school improvement status with our alternative high school. So big accomplishments there on both ends for both schools. So
Congratulations to our teachers as well.
Yes.
That's not an easily
Our administrators.
achieved milestone and not done without.
And parents,
significant
thank you.
effort.
Yes.
So true.
Absolutely.
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Pennington. We'll move on to item B. We'll have Mrs. Goodson give us a little information on that.
Awesome. We've got some new dual credit courses that we're working with Northwest Nazarene University on for our art teacher. And she's super excited about this opportunity and is working through the process just to make the necessary tweaks to her syllabus on that end to get that approval. And then a couple of different pilot resources that we are working for next year. One is called the Student Repair Academy. And that provides different modules for our student-run help desks. We have one at the middle school and one at the high school to be able to work more on the tech side of repairing of those devices. The nice part about this Student Repair Academy, it's also called SRA, is that it provides specific repair on our devices. So the make and model that we have. So those students will learn some valuable skills. SRA has their own type of certificate. It's not necessarily the industry standard CTP certificate, but it's a step in the right direction and would look great on a resume for any student who wants to go into a repair store to say, you know, I have the skill base to know how a repair center works and operates. If we decide on either one of these to move forward into beyond a piloting stage, we would run it through for a full approval process, typical to what we've done like with our other curricular adoptions. For our reading seminar class, it's a support reading class for some of our readers. They have a need for a supplemental resource for students, so they'll use our core curriculum piece to teach, say, the reading skill, but then they need something to practice it on, some rich content that is really engaging for students in that capacity. So on both of those, we'd ask for approval to pilot these resources, and then if we throughout the year see that we need to take it beyond this year, then we would again put that adoption together and formalize that process for you.
So as the supplemental resource, it's for all students.
This would be specifically for the reading seminar course that the middle school
Right, but
has.
any student can,
Any student enrolled in that course would have that
Okay,
piece as part of
but
that.
any student can enroll is what I guess what I'm saying,
They would
right?
need to meet I think the criteria for that support class and reading intervention.
Oh, so it is like, okay.
So just clarify, the pilot one, so the pilot resources would not get any sort of credit whatsoever at this point.
Meaning,
Well, you have a dual credit up above, but
correct, two separate topics.
okay,
One would be seeking approval to move forward with these dual credit courses at the high
Yeah.
school level.
Yeah.
And then the pilot resources is just really to keep you informed to what we're looking at. We found some needs that we have this upcoming year outside of our regular adoption schedule.
And students are already getting credit for those
Courses.
courses.
right, okay.
Yes. Yeah, so not new courses, just needing additional resources.
Gotcha.
Are those resources don't come from the Nazarene University though? These are just things that we're picking up.
Correct,
Okay.
two separate, the
Gotcha.
divider line, yeah, between those two.
Perfect.
The teacher for the dual credit courses was very confident that the current resources that we have, she can make the necessary adjustments to fit what the Northwest Nazarene University requires.
Yes, that's good.
Any questions?
Are there already other dual credit courses then? Do you know how many other dual credit courses there are?
Through Northwest Nazarene University.
Or through any other university?
Thank you.
The list just continues growing. Jay, I can get you the full list.
I'd be interested. I'm just learning all of this. It's very exciting to
Yeah.
hear. There's quite a few opportunities for that. So
There are, and they're just increasing. I know, but I brought forth 2 or 3 other ones just within the past couple of months.
Mhm.
We're working with these universities together. So there's lots of options for our students.
And honestly, I've had children reap those. I've had a child graduate a little early because of those, and they go to college ahead. It's nice.
My daughter's a semester ahead already in
Yeah,
college and hasn't
it's
even
nice.
gone except for a tour. So
very cool.
it's a good thing.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for working on that and
Yes.
finding more things. It's awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Let's go to item C, the handbook reviews. I don't know who was gonna talk on that. Anybody?
Lisa will, but as you looked at those handbooks, they had the summaries, the changes. There weren't significant changes. I mean, I shouldn't say, there weren't lengthy changes. So what you saw was just the full handbook with either highlighted changes or a summary. So if you have specific questions about any of those changes that were made, and then Lisa, if you had any other overviews you wanted to share.
No, I think the important thing is we continue to work with the elementaries just for consistency, some on all 3 elementaries, so you see consistent language there. Really a point of emphasis last year was to try to clean up some of the dress code and make sure things were following policy and more consistent at our secondary handbooks. And so you'll see that we're continuing to work on that, but becoming more consistent with some of those practices as well that we continue to adjust to those handbooks. And so outside of that, I think those are kind of some of the questions we've addressed in the past, but if there's further stuff that you saw in their edits, we can.
Well, and even the cell phone stuff
Yeah.
to be updated, and I had some with the academy, but I talked to Glenn and he gave me understanding, so we're good.
Well, and I was wondering, do all schools do that every year, or I noticed there's only 4 on here. There's no heights, no middle or high school.
Those will be in July.
They'll be in July?
Yep.
Okay.
And we'll have a few other handbooks, like so our tech handbook, staff handbook, so there'll be a few others that come to you in July as well.
It's kind of
Okay,
killer if
And
they're
the
all on
special,
there.
will the special ed handbook come in July?
It will come. What I'll need to do is we try to do that yearly, and so we did that a little bit later, so we try to stay on that cycle. So I'll double check the month, Cindy, but it will come
Okay.
back for review again, yes.
Okay.
We do all the handbooks every year.
Every-
Yeah, even if there were no changes, we would
Yeah.
approve it for the new school year.
And I'm grateful we don't do it all in one meeting, because
No, I would agree. I just didn't see them.
It's a lot.
So what do we need? Do we need an approval for these or?
Yeah.
Yes, we'll have to approve them. So,
So I have one more question. Once they're approved, then they'll come back and get done with all the changes, and then would we be able to get copies of those?
Yeah, so what we'll do is once you guys approve it tonight, they'll go through and make those changes final, and then we can send
Okay.
you a clean copy of the final draft moving forward for the school
Okay.
year as well.
and they're always online,
Yep.
Yep.
correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, sometimes the computer can get some. All right, let's move on to the negotiations report and presentation of the negotiated agreement proposal.
Perfect, thank you.
You bet.
So I'm gonna just go through a number of the summary pieces, and then we've got the negotiated agreement up here for reference, but it'll mainly, when we get to the salary schedule, some of the discussions of the salary schedule, we want to have that up so we can reference that as we go forward. I do want to note that the Education Association voted on, was it Thursday last week?
Yes.
Okay, on Thursday last week to ratify on their side this agreement. And so if we can scroll up to the, scroll down to the salary schedule for the certified staff. So this is what we're looking at and there's actually one, can you go a little bit? All right, there we go. Just to get that M3 on there. So this represents a a 5% increase on the base. So, and when we say on the base, it's 5% in every cell. So every cell that you see there moves up 5%, with the exception of M3. If you look down at M3 at that 67,000 there, that one actually represents a 7.5% increase. And we look at that primarily with that particular cell because they really have nowhere else to go. The only place that they can get an increase is if we increase the base. And so, you know, and you can't do that every year where you give them a lot more, or you start that last cell becomes so far apart from the rest. But every several years, we have to address that last cell just to make sure that we're keeping up and that they're able to get a meaningful increase in terms of cost of living and things like that. So they had a 7.5%. Every person, we also honored steps and lanes. So if people were moving down or across the salary grid, we're honoring those movements this year. And that for all, again, but those bottom cells, that represents a 2.67% increase. And so the typical employee within this grid, as they make a move, if they are just stepping down, they're getting 2.67% plus the 5%. So they're closer to 8. But that, you know, because of different placements on there, that's not everybody. And as they move across, when they move across, that percentage increases as well, depending on where they're moving across to. And that would be moving across based on education, increasing the number of courses that they've taken. Then we also added, I wanted to make a note, in the steps R1, R2, and R3. In the past, those 3 cells have been the same amount. So as somebody came in, they received the amount that first year, and then they were kind of, even though they moved down to R2 and R3, they didn't get an increase. We've changed that so that they do realize a small increase. It was essentially taking the funds that we had there and splitting those up, just so that besides anything we add to the base, as they're moving down, those new teachers are able to realize a little bit higher increase. We added 1 personal day for all staff. That was another negotiated item. We also addressed the coaches' salaries. Could we move down to the coaches' salaries?
Did you want to?
I'll come back to that. Thank you. Oh, that is little. Okay, so let me address how the coaches' salaries are typically addressed. And there are a few exceptions for coaches that were based on previous years' negotiated agreements that are grandfathered in. So I'm not speaking of the coaches that have been grandfathered in, but essentially what you look at is you take that base salary, which has a years of experience in that coaching position, and it's coaches and advisors. So anybody who's leading an extracurricular group of students. And so what we would look at is a base salary based on years of experience. So if we have a new coach, they're going to be looking at that base salary of $42,120. But then we go down to the different positions, and you might see this baseball high school head coach. The baseball high school head coach is 7% of whatever years of experience they have. So what the coaches and extracurricular compensation hasn't been addressed by the district for what did we decide, 4 years at least?
Was it 2015?
It was 2000.
Since 2015. So we're looking at a number of years, and to try and bring it up to speed and make us our salaries competitive with the other coaching salaries within the valley, we felt like there was going to be a pretty significant increase we needed to address. So what we've decided and agreed with the coaches, we had a committee of coaches together, and then with the negotiating team, that this first year we addressed that base salary. And that base salary that you see there is a significant increase from the base salary that we had previously. And then next year, what we'll do is we're going to address the percentages for each of those areas. What we found is that many of these are kind of skewed based on the actual amount of time that our coaches are putting in. Excuse me. So what we've been trying to do is do an evaluation of the amount of time. For instance, some of our high school coaches, the head coach of some of these programs are really working on that all year round, and they have a number of students that they're a part of. Some of our advisory extracurricular groups have, as many as 80 to 90 students, but they're being paid as if they have, 10. And so we're looking at the amount of time that they're putting in. We're looking at the number of students that are involved in their programs, and we're going to be making adjustments to that for next spring. So we've made the first, essentially we needed to make two adjustments to the base and then to the percentages. So this first year we took that base and made the adjustment. That gets us about halfway to where we need to be. And then next year we'll address these percentages, which will allow us to get ourselves back in competition with all of our neighbors.
The SIC, yeah.
Yeah, the SIC. So, any questions on that, coaches?
What was the base last year? How far up
Can you
I do have.
have that? I'm just curious. Roughly.
We have middle school coaches being paid for.
Let's get that first one.
So,
it's
35,732.
Okay,
And we're up to, if we go back, 42.
42,120.
So you see a significant
yeah,
jump there in that base. And that was what we tried to do, is bring that in line with what our actual teaching salary is. And so as that increases, this will increase, and that just allows that to perpetuate. So we don't get stagnant again.
right.
And then if you could roll back to the speech language pathologists. We also addressed the salaries for our speech language pathologists, school psychologists, occupational therapists, and then not listed here is nurses. There's a line below on our nurses. But these are professionals in the area that it is very difficult to find. Very difficult to entice these professionals to come out of private practice and work for the school district. Right now, we don't have an occupational therapist contracted with the school. We contract services with an outside company to provide those services. So we felt like we needed to adjust that and up that just to be competitive with other school districts, let alone private practice. So as you see here, this is again, do you have that, what
I do.
was previously? Could you speak to that?
So it used to be separate tables. The psychologist started at 50,586. Occupational therapist, physical therapist, 51,129. The speech language was 61,739. But to address that, as we looked back and where our speech language, it's not going to impact anybody that's with us. It actually gives those that are with us opportunity to grow, because it was capped out at a amount that now this caps them out at a higher amount. And so then it would just, those new to the profession coming to us would start at a little bit lower than the old scale, but none of those that have stayed with us, they'll actually have room to increase their salaries over time.
And for our speech language pathologists within the Treasure Valley, our speech language pathologist salary grid was in line with what other school districts were offering. So allowing that to maintain, but giving them more growth was the best way that we could entice in that regard. Any questions on these? And then Lisa, would you mind speaking to the nurses?
Not at all. So if we have registered nurses that come into us right now, the state of Idaho just recognizes their certification on the teaching salary scale. So they would fall on that teaching salary scale, which when you think about profession, it's not as competitive to come into a school and be a registered nurse. And so one step that we're taking this year is to increase wherever they would fall on that salary scale to 5%. And then in future years, we're going to figure out how we can honor their education, because it's just taken a little bit differently, and get them at higher pay rates than they currently are. And so this 5% is just a step in the right direction to get them to a little bit more competitive than where they
So we can
currently are.
retain them, maybe?
Yep,
That's our plan. We're trying, yes.
exactly. Any questions there? Okay, finally, I just wanted to call your attention to the insurance. You should have a document there in front of you. Can you bring that up, Lisa? Close mine out. I want to just bring mine up really quick too. So as you look at this, this proposal, it's, oh, sorry.
That one.
While she's finding that, I
Yes,
just
please.
had a kind of a general question because it kind of addresses what the audience speaker too, because we see general inflation at about 8%.
Right.
So we're trying to hope that teachers, their ability to survive doesn't go down, but you add the 5% plus the 2.5% of just being here one more year, so you're almost 8%, and then you add the 1,500. But also, is there any kind of statistical analysis as far as how many teachers are moving up that grid for their additional education? Is there a way to quantify that? I wonder to overall district.
I don't have anything at my disposal. And Lisa, tell me if you have anything different. I don't have anything that shows how, when they're moving and how often they're moving. I do have a static number of how many we have at different levels. And that's something that I can provide the board. It's just, essentially, we actually have it based on that salary grid, how many employees find themselves in each of those grids.
Yeah.
So that you could look at that.
Yeah, it just seems like, just guessing that district-wide, there would be at least a 1 or 2% increase just based upon their additional education
Right.
district-wide, so.
No, but we'll all get that document put together, and then we can start looking at that document based on past years. I just don't know necessarily. I know that we prepared it this year. I don't know what the past administrations prepared, so.
Yeah, just, the general public is like, gosh, are we paying teachers enough to keep up with inflation? That's, I mean.
Well, going back to the education factor, we don't require all their credits to be turned in until end of August, early September, just because their contracts roll in September. And so then there would be a slightly different number come September payroll of where their education actually moves them to as well.
I see.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up, Lisa. So on the left-hand side is what we have this year, and this is all through Blue Cross of Idaho, the state consortium. And so you'll see we were at this deductible of that 2,000, a very high deductible of 2,000, 4,000. You can see what we've got there as far as out of pocket. And those numbers are in network, out of network numbers. But as you see what the planned cost was and what teachers paid. So on that far left, the tan box there is what teachers paid based on whether they were covered as just the employee. That first one, just the employee didn't pay anything. Then you have the employee plus spouse paying $663, $298, $431, $856, depending on their different coverages for their family situation. And so as we were looking at it, and we did work with a committee of teachers to put, we worked from about mid-April through the end of May to try and analyze the different options that were available. And what we landed on in terms of having the best impact for the amount of money that we had to put into the insurance package was a $750, $1,500 deductible, with that out of pocket dropping to, for medical, $3,750 and $7,500. Down, that's down significantly from the $5,000 and $10,000. But then as you look at the cost with, as we're increasing the coverage, we're dropping the cost. So you can see how, and Lisa, can you get it just so that the comparison can be there? Can you slide that a little bit? Right there. So the employee that is just covering the employee still doesn't pay anything, and I'll address that in just a moment. But you can see it dropped by 175 in each of those other in each of those other areas. And so if they were maintaining the same coverage as they had previously, they would actually realize 175 dollars a month, about $1,200, $1,400 dollars. No, I'm doing my math wrong. 2,100, thank you. Well, it was the juxtaposition there. $2,100 of extra cash that is available to them. And so those employees that weren't paying anything already, we're going to take that 175 and give that to them in a stipend. So that essentially everybody that qualifies for insurance can see realized actual dollar amount increase to their monthly take home. So that was another thing that we did as we were working through this process. And then just as a note regarding admin and classified, we're finishing up admin right now, but we'd be looking at a similar increase on the base and an adjustment to their responsibility factors. We'll have that report for you in July. Classified staff will be looking at a 5% increase as well. And classified staff, as they're moving across, they also will honor their steps. And so as they move across, they also see a 2.67% increase.
So this is an additional 200, if a teacher.
On the insurance?
Yeah, if the teacher has themselves, a spouse and a child insured, they're essentially getting 200 a month more than they were last year.
Exactly.
This, yeah.
And they'll be less out of pocket. So again,
Have
more
better
cash in their
insurance,
hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other questions? That's essentially the what is happening with teachers this year. And what was ratified by the MEA and would need to be approved by you as a board for us to move forward with issuing contracts based on that.
I appreciate the creativity to try to get as much as we can back to the teachers. And I feel like that has happened, so I appreciate that a lot.
And did you just say that it is a better plan?
Yeah, it's at 750, and instead of 2,000, 4,000 deductible, it's a 750.
Yes,
1,500.
that's, I saw that, but in terms of what they get it within that, it's a better plan for them?
Well, a lot of the benefits that come with it are similar as the previous plan. As you look down on the co-insurance, those are similar. Physician co-pay, those are similar. Prescription drugs,
Yeah.
same.
It's just you're out of pocket.
So it's
But it's
basically
The deductible and out of pocket
And out-
are the things
Okay.
that improved.
Your premium, so.
Any other questions on the negotiated agreement? Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And now we'll move on to E, bond election resolution calling a special election for the proposition of issuing general obligation school bonds of the district.
Okay, so tonight I just wanted to go through a few things, and we do have some visitors with us tonight from Holly Troxel. We have Nick Smith and Brandon Helgeson. Just raise your hands just so they know who you are. And then from Piper Sandler, we have Eric Henninger. And they'll each have a little bit to say to us as we prepare to make that decision as a board. But I just wanted to call some attention to a couple of things that have just been, some concerns have been brought up. Just as we're moving into this idea of a bond for an elementary school, a CTE center, and repairs at Heights. We're also doing this at a time when you're seeing inflation, you're seeing gas prices go up, assessed values of homes are going up significantly, and just wanted to make sure that that's, one thing that, we're aware of, and that we address how that impacts, what we're asking of our patrons impacts them in terms of that, so that as you're making a decision as a board, that's all very clear. The first thing I wanted to just address, and as I address this is what we've done is we had some volunteers bring us their past tax bills. And we walked through this, and each of these documents that I show here will be available on our website starting tomorrow. But I wanted to just walk through, and as I'm saying this is not a conversation saying that we shouldn't have to worry about it. It's some examples of how the bond has reacted and how tax bills have reacted to different, to increased home values. So on property one, you look through there, what you'll see is, thank you, Lisa, the bond rate as it's going from 2017 to 2021 decreases. And so that rate you have right there translates to a cost per 100,000 that is listed there. And you see that in 2017, the cost per 100,000, and this is strictly the bond. This doesn't take into account supplemental levy or our tort levy. You see that drops from 367 through 2021 up to $161 dollars per 100,000. That percent change equates to, if you look from 2017 to 2021, to a decrease of 56% in the bond rate. Now, for this same person, as you slide over there, you'll see that taxable property value, and this is after the homeowner's exemption, the taxable property value goes up over that time. And so you actually see from 2017 to 2021, a 72% increase in that person's taxable property. The next line is the total bond bill. So just for the bond, what that particular homeowner was paying. And so you can see that overall dropped 24%. And then the total tax bill for that person. And so when we say total tax bill, we're including all of the entities that can tax any individual in Canyon County. And we're talking, these are all specifically in Middleton School District. And you'll see that tax bill actually stayed relatively, I mean, it fluctuated up. It went up 11%, up 0.5, then down 6 and down 5 for an overall change of negative 0.4%. Meaning for that person, as the bond, the amount that the bond rate was going down, their taxable property was also going up, in this case, 72% over 5 years. And then in that time, their actual tax bill didn't change. If we can go to the next property, this next property has a different situation. And this is why I put all kinds of asterisks and stars by this. It would be the lesson we want to learn is that how the home values changes based on other factors, not necessarily just the school. It is not to say that what we're showing is represents how everybody's going to experience it within Middleton School District. This particular property, they didn't have back to 2017, they had back to 2018. You can see again, the cost per 100,000 didn't change. The percent change of the bond rate is simply because it only goes back to 2018. That's why it's different from the 56. But as we look at the taxable property in this situation, as it's going down, as the property value is going up from 2018 to 2021, it actually increased by 95%, almost doubling. And then as you go over to, we'll just go over to the tax bill, you follow that down, you see in this case, they realized an 18% increase for the bond. And then if we can go down to property 3, you see again, the same thing, 51% reduction in the bond cost per 100,000. Taxable property only went up by 56%. Now I say only, comparatively to the other two. 56% is still a significant increase. The total tax bill in this regard, in this situation, from 2018 to 2021 was actually a -1. So it was less in 2021 than it was in 2018. And so as we start looking, one of the things that's happened over this last several weeks is that patrons in our community have started receiving their
Assessment.
assessed values. And those assessed values are going up significantly. But how that will actually play out in terms of their actual dollar amount is going to vary from home to home, and not all will feel it the same way that others might feel that increase. And then as Eric speaks from Piper Sandler, he'll talk a little bit about that tax. I mean, what we expect to see if we were to put that $59 million bond out to our patrons and look at what they're doing. So if we go to that next,
This is the correct one.
No.
Is it the Word document?
Yeah. We need to, it's almost just a review of it, but okay. And this is just graphically from that first property, what you see, the cost of the bond over 100,000 over the last 5 years, how the cost has gone down, the bond rate has gone down in the same time that the taxable property is going up. Now, if we can go to that next one that you had, which is,
This one.
yes. And then did you have that other? Yeah, the Canyon County tax in schools. There were some concerns that what Middleton was asking of its patrons was significantly higher than surrounding school districts. And so I just wanted to go out and look and see what we were seeing. And so it highlighted in green, and we'll just focus on 2021 levy rate. This includes any supplemental levies that are being asked of the citizenry and plant facility levies and bonds. And so, and you'll see in some of those there are expired. So like the supplemental levy in Caldwell, that second line, well, for 2020 and 2021, that had expired. So that's not being included in that calculation. But you can see and we'll just scroll through. In Caldwell, we're at 277 per 100,000, CUNA 289, Homedale 366, Marsing 324, Melba 281, Middleton 222, Nampa 231, Notice 496, Parma 272, Valley View 328, West Ada 157, and Wilder 211. And so when you look at that, obviously West Ada has that lowest amount, but they have that lowest amount because they have
More rooftops.
more people and commercial that are playing into that. With the exception of West Ada and Wilder, Middleton has the lowest of all of those other school districts. And so I just share that because that was a concern that was brought up, that we were taxing more, that the school district was asking more of its patrons than other districts. And so, there's some that are very similar to us, but if you're talking that specific number, we're at that lower end.
Was Valley View on there?
Valley View was on there at 300 and something,
Almost 50%.
328
And then, they're
in Valley View.
need 2 elementary schools too.
Yeah. So, and then that other one that I sent is just a graphic. This is just a graphic. The orange represents 2020. Oh, okay.
I made it really big.
I'll see it.
That'll be all right. Okay, there we go.
There you go.
And then if you can just go to the graph, those numbers all came from that previous spreadsheet. You see Middleton right there in the middle, that the orange is the 2020 tax cost per 100,000. The blue is the 2021. And so you can see how that dropped in almost every district, not every district, but most districts dropped. But you can see that Middleton is still there. Just graphically, it's the same thing. So with that, if I could turn the floor over to Eric Henninger from Piper Sandler, bring up his slide deck, and he can walk through what this can look like for Middleton School District.
Okay, thank you. So I think I was in front of this board in April. It's hard to keep track of time. It's busy for everybody. And I went through a lot of slides, and there were some similar data to what Superintendent Gee just showed you. And really what I was going to do tonight is just focus on the bond proposal that you're considering to put out for an election. So I don't have all the background slides in here. But one thing I wanted to start with is debt capacity. And just, we have to start there because an Idaho school district cannot incur debt beyond 5% of its market value. And the market value we're using is, last year's. It's not the increase that people just got assessment notices on, because that's not official yet. Those are all preliminary numbers. Bottom line is you got available debt capacity of 135.6 million. So that's the most you could ask your voters to approve. I know that that's not what you're planning to do, but if you were, it'd be, you'd have your debt capacity. So good place to start the discussion. The next item here is these are required ballot disclosures, and Nick and Brandon will go into more detail on this, but a couple, 3 years ago, there's legislation that changed that said we need to show a very simple calculation of the cost to the taxpayer of this bond proposal in isolation. So without taking into account what's happening with your old bonds. So, if your old bonds are paid off and the new bond comes on, generally you can keep the taxes pretty level. But this doesn't, this just looks at just the bond proposal with very simple math, or at least I think it's simple. So what we do is we look at the principal and interest cost for a $59.4 million bond is about $90.5 million. So principal amount of $59 million, interest cost of 31 adds up to $90 million. But the state has the bond levy equalization program, and that's the subsidy money that the district receives on an annual basis to offset taxpayer costs. So we subtract that, we get to 68 million, which is the amount that would need to be levied. It's a 20-year payback, so we divide that by 20, and you've got an average annual bond payment of 3.4 million. Then we divide that into your market value, which is your old market value, the one that from September 2021, not the new one, because again, the new one's not official. And we have to base it on current conditions, and what we interpret that to be is what we know to be your market value as it stands with the state tax commission. So that's 2.4 billion is your market value that we're using. So we divide the 3.4 million into the 2.4 billion, and the average cost to the taxpayer per 100,000 is $140. Okay. Superintendent Gee just went through a bunch of information about how your current tax rates, what was it, 222?
Yeah.
So you look at that number, you think, oh, is it going to increase our property taxes by $140? The answer is no. That's the average cost of that proposal over the 20 years. But we're going to wrap that around your existing bonds so that the actual increase that you'd see in terms of tax rate is a different number. But we're again required to show this in ballot disclosures. We also looked at a smaller bond issue of 34 million and did the math, and that estimated average annual cost for the smaller bond was $80. Any questions on that? Okay. So then if we go to the next slide. So here's where we talk about what is the kind of the real tax impact. If I'm a taxpayer, just tell me what my tax was, how my taxes could change compared to the current year. And so we need to look at what's happening with your existing bonds. This is your existing annual payments. Your current levy is about 4 million, and then but your payments going forward, net of levy equalization, is about 3 million. And so there's some room there to fit in payments on a new bond. And if you look at the next slide, This shows the 59,435,000. The black bars here are now the payments on your existing bonds. The blue bars are the payments on the new 59.4 million. And we keep them smaller up front while your old bonds are getting paid off. And then once the old bonds pay off, we backfill. So we end up with kind of a combined level payment and a combined level levy amount, which would require us to go from a bond levy of about 4 million right now to 4.5 million. So it's a $500,000 increase. If you look back at that last slide, the average annual cost was over 3 million. But we're showing that really all you need to do is increase the annual levy by $500,000, which equates to about a $20 per 100,000 increase in the property tax. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Excuse me, when is it, the old paid off? I can't see the bottom.
2030, I think, isn't it?
What year?
2030.
There.
Yeah, 2030.
2030.
Yeah. So the existing bonds, and there's a very small payment in 2030. So effectively, those get paid off in 2029. Because the district's last bond election was in 2008.
Yes.
So if we go to the next slide, so what this looks at is,
Nice work, Tom.
I'm sorry, can we go back?
Yes.
That increase of $20 per 100,000 is based on your current market value. So if we just say, if there's no change in your market value, I'd expect your tax rate to go up $20. But we're hearing from the county, the market value is going up 50, 60%. So if we go to the next slide, this shows what we would expect to happen to the cost per 100,000 of the bond. This year, 2022, again, your bond levy is just a little under 4 million. The tax per 100,000 just for the bond this year is $161. We take the bond levy up to 4.5 million and your market value grows 60%. Again, that's the preliminary data out of the county is showing that the Middleton School District's market value is projected to grow 60% from 2.4 billion to 3.9 billion. That tax rate per 100,000 goes down to 115. The thing to keep in mind there is that 60% increase is not because there's, it's not all these new houses. There's a lot of new houses, yeah, but there's the increase in the existing market value that's occurring as well. But that additional 500,000 is going to get spread out among those new taxpayers. So this is what based on the preliminary data, we'd expect to see your tax rate drop from $161 to $115 for the bond with the new bond passing at 59 million. Any questions on that? Okay. This looked at the smaller bond amount of 34 million, which I believe took the professional technical component out of the bond and maybe a few other things. Smaller bond, and really with a smaller bond, because of the drop in your existing debt and it getting paid off, we could actually structure the new bond payments at that $4 million annual levy. So really no material change in the amount that you levy to take on a new bond, which would mean that there really wouldn't be any increase cost per 100,000 because we have room to fit it in. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see there that with a 60% increase in market value, we'd see a tax rate go down to 102. So you're talking about a $13. You think back, the other one was 115. This one's 102 in terms of just really trying to kind of drill down to what's the difference in terms of the cost of the tax.
So yes, did you have statistics on what percentage of that market value is based on the increase in values versus new homes? Just rough estimates on that.
I don't. I would guess, based on historical data that I've seen, that the new construction is probably only about 5% of that increase.
Seems like it would be a lot more than that. I hope it is. I haven't looked at my new assessment. I'm getting worried.
No,
Should be.
around the state, we're seeing property tax, we're seeing the
Yeah.
assessment, the assessed value notices being in the 50 to 55% in some areas.
Well, regardless of the assessed value of the house, the bond payment is what's covered, right? So it's not that the school bond gets more money out of that.
No.
It adjusts. So the chunk that the school takes is virtually the same with some
Yeah.
small variation, but I mean, it's not, if your house doubles, we're not collecting double.
No.
Because we're building more houses and we only need a certain amount to pay that bond payment. We don't have to collect twice the bond payment.
Our property tax revenue is not a rate-driven levy,
Mhm.
right? You certify a dollar amount. And so if you think about it this way, last year you certified 4 million to collect, and this year you certified 4 million to collect. And if there's been any level of new construction added to the tax rolls, on balance, people's existing taxes, the existing taxpayers, their taxes should go down because there's more taxpayers paying it, right? I mean, that just stands to reason. Now, there might be some taxpayer that has their property value go up way more than the average, and they may see some increase, but it would be, in my opinion, minimal, just because it, again, stands to reason, if you're levying the same amount, how could the tax bill actually go up? Yep. Now, with the $59 million proposal, we're talking about some increase in that levy, so there is gonna be a modest increase in it.
But we were talking about $20, right?
You're $13 to, I mean, in reality.
Once you see the market value get up, you know, grow. Yep.
Per 100,000.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But it's not, I mean, if my tax bill went up 50%, I'm not gonna see a 50% increase of what I'm paying towards the bond.
34 versus 59. So that's pretty significant based on low rates. But you're better paying for your bucks, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, again, just to say, we can say it in a bunch of different ways,
Yeah,
right? But
yeah.
if you're collecting the same amount, market value goes up 60%, your tax rate's gonna go down 60%. Your tax bill should remain the same.
Mhm.
And I think the historical data that
It should.
you saw in some of those examples that Superintendent Gee had kind of really bore that out, because the district's tax levy the last couple of years has been pretty flat,
Mhm.
In fact, it's actually lower in terms of dollar amount today than it was 3 years ago. And then one final comment on interest rates. It's been a wild ride with what's happened with municipal bond interest rates, and we've seen a little bit of a decline in the last couple of weeks from basically what has been a straight line up in rates, but our projections are based on where the rate market is right now. We do have some levers if the bond passes and rates continue to go up. We can mitigate the impact of those interest rates by delaying the bond sale, lowering the amount of accrued interest you have to incur until you actually get to spend the money on construction. So I'm very comfortable with the numbers we're showing you, because we've got some protection against that rising rate environment built in.
It seems like Wednesday they're going to raise the Fed rate a full 0.75%, which is pretty significant. But it seems like at the same time the materials and the cost of construction is going down to help really account. I mean, it's a good offsetting. It seems like as the housing market may slow, the cost of construction, goes down, which may offset that increase in interest rate.
You can see some pressure off in construction inflation. And one point about that, and I'm glad you brought it up, is the interest rates we're seeing today in the market for bonds anticipate the Fed raising rates, 50 basis points, 3 more, at each of the next 3 sessions and then beyond. So the bond investors who are buying bonds that are 20-year bonds, they're not waiting around for the Fed to make a decision to raise rates. They assume that they will because the Fed's basically told us they will. So, on Thursday, if the Fed raises rates 0.5%, it doesn't mean these rates go up 0.5%. These rates have already kind of baked that anticipation in. So, where things could change is if the Fed has to be more aggressive than everyone thinks, and they're already built in that they're going to be pretty aggressive, rates could go up. If they're less aggressive, rates could actually come back down a little bit.
Okay, any other questions for Eric?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If I could give the floor over, and I introduced, that was Nick Smith, this is Nick Miller. I apologize, Nick.
Answered any number of names. Eric's a tough act to follow because what you're really interested in is obviously the financial impact, but there is the legal aspect to your bond election, your bond issue. And that's our job. You just notice down here the Holly Cross logo, that's our law firm. And Brandon and I will walk you through basically two issues: the bond election resolution, which you have as an action item. And we get asked this question a lot now: is the role of the board and the management in the election campaign or the informational campaign. So Brandon will cover that. But I want to talk a little bit about what is it that we actually do. So on the next slide, I think if we go into that, yeah. So what the bond council does, ultimately we have to give a legal opinion that the bonds are valid under state law. And for some reason that they weren't valid, the bond investors could actually sue us. We're basically an insurer of the legal validity of the bonds. So you scratch your head and say, well, what do we need to know to make sure the bonds are in fact valid? Well, first thing is we have a valid election. So that's why we get involved at this early stage to draft the election resolution for you, discuss it with you, and have you approve it and present it to the voters. There is an Idaho statute, extensive statute on what it takes to, when you actually have the election passed, what do the bonds have to look like, what the legal documents are, so we draft those. And then we have to come before the board. Obviously, the board has to authorize any bonded indebtedness. We also give a legal opinion that bonds are tax exempt. Eric showed you that rate scale. That's not prime rates, that's not CD rates, those are tax exempt rates. Because as a public agency, you can borrow under the IRS code, you can borrow at lower rates because the investors don't pay tax on the interest when they receive their interest money. So they're going to quote you a lower interest rate. It's interesting, there was a time in which that was thought of as an element of federalism. The U.S. Supreme Court in a 9-0 decision said no. It's totally in the discretion of Congress to decide who gets a tax exemption on their debt and who doesn't. So we have an extensive body of IRS regulations that the Treasury puts out that we have to track through to ensure that the bonds are tax exempt. So that's what we do. So let's turn to a little bit more about us. We've been doing this a long time. We started working for the district when we refinanced bonds before the high school, and we're pretty active with your member organization, ISBA. So let's talk about the resolution. I know Eric presented you the two forms, but I think our guidance was just to present to you the form of the 59 million resolution. You should have it in your board packet, the actual text of it. I've just excerpted some of that into the PowerPoint here, so we're going on now.
Please, forward. Move forward. Just hit the space.
This is the title of it. I think when we had the motion, we asked for somebody to move, we adopt the resolution.
This is that printed out here. Yeah. That's that.
So then we go on. Again, we do have an Idaho Supreme Court case that says the election is a contract with the voters. So good news, bad news. It limits you, but also empowers you. You're setting limits on yourself that you have to agree to. You're agreeing with the voters what limits we're going to put on ourselves. You're also getting an empowerment to do what you're asking them to let you do. So if you look next at we say, well, what are the key items, which is one, how much? So this is the maximum amount of debt we can incur.
makes sense, Kevin. We're saying in the resolution, we're not gonna go past 20 years. The statute lets us go out to 30 if we wanted to, you spread the debt out more, like your 30-year mortgage. But, you know, just like your 30-year mortgage, the interest cost of that really piles up. So most districts use 20, this district has always used 20. Eric's numbers use 20. Then for what? In other words, you literally have to ask the patrons to authorize what you can use the money for. You can be pretty general, but we always think that just like you're talking about, patrons want to see what they're voting for. So this is the way we formulated the proposition. And this is what they'll see on the ballot. They're going to look at the ballot and say, we're going to authorize bonds for these purposes. Again, you know, pretty straightforwardly, but we've had examples where districts haven't authorized, they haven't included like a number 4, and hopefully construction costs continue to come down. And they have leftover money, but they can't use it because they've limited themselves to those other discrete projects. So the catch-all may get some controversy about it, people saying, you know, what are you doing with that? And I think the answer is, well, it's a hedge against having extra money. Because if literally we're bound, like I said, contract with the voters, we are handcuffed by what we're asking you to let us do. So then I think those are the key items on that. I think we next go to the financial disclosure. This is a tortured history of the legislature putting more and more requirements on what a bond election ballot has to say beyond just yes, no for these projects for this much for this long. So prior to 2018, so this was even true in 2008. You have to put this information on. Estimated interest rate, total payback, the term, and also your existing debt. So that's a given. You know, we've had that for a long time. And frankly, that's not too, impactful. If you look at the dollar amount bond, they can extrapolate most of this type of information. And the interest rate, obviously, if we were doing this a year ago, rates would have been lower, but we counseled with Eric to use this as an estimate. And the statute only requires an estimate, we're not bound by that. It's a good faith estimate of us at the time. So we're good there. So, but then starting in 2018, the legislature introduced, the next slide should show this, introduced the concept that we'll put on the ballot the impact of 100,000 of taxable value. Then 19 now applied to your supplemental. And then in 2021, the legislature said, if you don't do this, your election's invalid. Kind of serious. The history since 2018 is really mixed. We've had some districts that passed, regardless of what the amount was. As Eric points out, we think it's somewhat misleading because it doesn't necessarily let you explain if you have current debt that this dollar amount per 100,000 isn't the real amount. It's the amount of this bond issue taken in isolation. So I think if we put on the next slide, yeah, so just like Eric said, taken in isolation, this is what's going to be on your document or a sample ballot. That's what's going to be on the ballot. And that's verbatim from the code. So, we just basically have to say that. Some districts have asked us whether they can add an explanation, like we have a current bond levy, or we're going to reduce the supplemental, we're going to reduce our plant levy. And that's your call. We haven't presented examples of that because I think the story here, as Eric was saying, is so complicated that you're really just going to have to do that in your messaging. You can do one-on-one, postcards, or however, what website. We think it would be too complicated to try to explain much more. I think the dilemma, of course, is you've got that 140 number sitting out there that people are going to see on the ballot. Can't do anything about that. That's going to be there. What you do to ameliorate that in your campaign, I think that's your challenge. But as Eric has given you really good information about how to explain that between the combination of rising market value, steady levy rate, and other debt, the number is not 140 per 100,000. It's a blunt instrument. Most states have it. Utah actually says it's based upon the average house in the district, not per 100,000. So it's just a challenge to do it. So I'm out of my voice anyway, so Brandon's going to talk about the election. Unless you have some questions.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great, so on Nick's point, when you forego that additional disclosure, a lot of that messaging needs to become during campaigning for the bond. And we get quite a few frequently asked questions on school districts on the extent to which they're able to advocate for elections and supplemental elections, planned facility levy elections, and bond elections. And here's the general rule, and I won't read it verbatim for you, but essentially, school district employees, staff, are not allowed, or they're allowed to use district funds, resources, and time and property to prepare educational materials for an election. So something like appears directly on the ballot disclosure, some of the information that Eric presented tonight, that is something that you can provide to voters, but you cannot use district funds, resources, time, and property to advocate in favor of a bond issuance. So it's a little bit more complicated than just saying you're not allowed to say vote yes and use district time to prepare those types of materials. Sometimes school districts can, I think a little bit of the more close question that school districts can sometimes run into is when explaining the need for the projects that these bonds will be financing. So if you kind of get a little bit close to the lines of what could be perceived as exaggerated need for certain projects, that kind of toes the line a little bit closer, something that might not be permissible. So it's something that school districts should be very wary of. So that includes using school property, so actual physical property like the boardroom here, using school computers, having employees that are paid an hourly wage, preparing any sort of advocacy materials on school time. Salaried employees especially start getting a little bit closer to the line that they need to be a little bit more careful because there are no general working hours for salaried employees. So it's generally best that salaried employees try to stay kind of as far away from anything that can be seen as advocacy. But I think on the next slide we have kind of one of the most asked questions, which relates directly to you as Board of Trustees members. And it's, are the elected school board trustees subject to the same limitations as employees? And the answer is no. You're not paid. You're not paid a salary. You're allowed to advocate for a favorable vote in your individual capacity. So you can't be using your school district board member email to try to advocate for a vote. But as long as you're not using district resources, that is kind of a blunt example, you're allowed to advocate. And so an example is you can speak at a service club or community meeting for a yes vote in your individual capacity. You should be a little bit careful if there's multiple board members at a meeting of that type to make sure that it doesn't kind of get close to the level of what would be a board meeting, so you're not making these sort of decisions when you're together. But as long as you're acting in your individual capacity, you're allowed to advocate for a yes vote, and that's kind of where school districts might have the most power rather than staff or administrators. And I think that kind of concludes, that was just a really quick primer, but if you ever have any questions on any type of materials that are going to be provided, we're always happy to go over them. We do that often to kind of make sure that nothing's getting a little bit too close to comfort based on Idaho election law and case law that's kind of on that point.
I just have a really brief question. So as a school board member, say for example, if I post on Facebook that I'm going to have an open house just to present the information on the bond, do you see any potential pitfalls or issues there?
Well, having an open house in your individual capacity is fine, especially if you're just providing information, not advocating one way or another. That's the way to be the safest. And if there aren't any other board members present, I think that'd be fine as well, even if it was going to be somewhat to the level of advocacy. But I think
you having an open house, as long as it's not on school property, as long as you're not using any sort of district resources like printers, you're not enrolling staff to help you kind of prepare these materials on working time. Then
If there's a staff member that comes to my house for this open house and we're not advocating, we're just providing information, that's still okay. Right?
as long as it's not kind of during working hours and they're just there in their individual capacity.
Okay, after hours.
Right. Any other questions? Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, overall, as we heard a lot of information here tonight, any other questions that you as a board have? Any discussion you'd like to have?
Do we know, I guess, I mean, this is really a city question, housing starts right now?
We do not know a specific number of housing starts. The last number that I'd seen of approved, and this is, I have to hedge a little bit just because they did put an emergency moratorium on new
Right.
building permits. So some of these plats might have been approved, but an individual building permit would
Right.
not. But the last one that I'd heard was in the 2,500 units range of either building permits or development units that are available for building.
And current roofs in the school district, do we have that number?
I do not have that number. Alicia, is she still here? Oh, thank you. Did the county ever give us any of that?
He did, it's in the email. I don't know if it's how current it is. He did a data search for a timeline for us. So I can go dig that.
If you wouldn't mind, that would be fantastic.
Because the moratorium's very temporary.
Yes.
And so
182 days.
we're looking at, I mean, we don't know what the projected growth, the last time I had a conversation with somebody at City Hall, the number was outrageous for the next, till.
In terms
2028.
of new development.
New development, it just like.
And it's not just the city, but also the county.
Right,
Mhm.
so, trains come, like it or not. And it's, and
We're on
more,
the train.
and with the, I mean,
What are
it's
you
just,
talking about?
you can't stop it. It's,
No.
the growth is here, the infrastructure's not, we need help with our schools and we gotta, and I think, just trying to Band-Aid this thing along and try and pass stuff periodically. It's tough to run it. Tough.
The good thing about our situation is anybody that drives around our community can just see there's thousands of new houses and our growth is just overwhelming. And so it's so apparent. I mean, like last night I drove around, just a lot of new subdivisions. Every time you drive a new neighborhood, if you haven't been there in a month, you're like, there's 100 new houses
Seriously.
on every block. I mean, it's just
Each of
unbelievable.
those houses has kids that need to be stuffed in a school that we are required by Idaho Constitution to educate these kids. And just,
And our hands are tied. We can't pass that cost on to the developer. We can't add.
That's right.
And that's the tough thing.
Yeah, but where we get the benefit though is, regardless or not, we've got increased values.
Right.
Okay, so that's probably what's gonna save us the most, is increased values.
Yeah.
Not only if as you were just discussing, we only got 5%, let's say, new homes right now. The rest of it is coming with just market value. We can't stop it. Nothing we can do about it. You can protest all you want with the county. The county's gonna increase your taxes, and that's gonna happen. But with those increased market values and everything else, technically, we actually are in a better position bond-wise in the long term. When you look at the increase that we would have to take to go to 4.5 million is not that much because of the increased values in our market. The taxes, you're gonna pay the taxes regardless. We all are. So having that extra bond value now with the rates being low enough at this current time, it's not gonna have as much effect as possibly down the road. That's why I think, me personally, us even dropping back to 34 million over 59 million and dropping the CTE, which we really need. We need that because of that growth. Not only, I think we're gonna see a balance to where the new homes are gonna catch up with the current market values, which is even gonna help even more. But we just obviously had an increase. I got 41%. So I got my assessed value. I went up 41%. But at the same time, all the new developments and everything else, obviously that's bringing more children to our schools. And we need the capacity with the CTEs, we need the capacity with the new middle school, and we need the improvements. Otherwise, we're gonna be in a world of hurt.
Absolutely.
And if you look at it, and just like you had mentioned, well, it's $13 per 100,000, but look at what we are getting for the $13 per 100,000. And for some people, it will be a stretch, obviously. For others, it may not. I mean, I'm looking at this, and I come from the money world. So I look at the three different examples that he's giving where one person's house went down, another person's house took a significant increase. Well, we don't know exactly what that is, and it's going to vary. It could have been they didn't have a homeowner's exemption at that time, and now they do. Or they bought a house real cheap, built it up, and now they're seeing that significant difference. Okay, so I mean, it's going to be sporadic everywhere you go, but we got to look at the big picture. Where are we going to be in 5 years? Not 10 years. Where are we going to be in 5 years? And do we want to come back? Because we have the opportunity to pass a bond at 59 million with the increase in growth, because the values are not going to go down with this increased growth. All that's going to do is help us over time. But if we put a Band-Aid on it, let's say go 34 million, but then here we are 2 or 3 years down the road, less than 5 years down the road, and we're out of space already because we did put a Band-Aid on it. Where does that leave us? Because we don't know what's going to happen after that.
And I think the positive socioeconomic impact of having these additional programs, just in the community. So we have a subset of kids that aren't necessarily going to a university or a college to be able to leave school. The elementary school is just, it's not even negotiable. It needs done. We don't have enough room for our kids now. The CTE piece, to have somebody leaving school with viable skills. And funny enough, I was talking to one of my business customers today, just talking about some of the cool stuff we're doing in Middleton, and that we were looking to float something like this. She said, my daughter left school, high school, going through a CTE program and had her CNA certificate, and she's not going to college, but she now has a job. She doesn't live with mom. She doesn't play Xbox in the basement all day. She has a viable skill that she's taken into the community, and it's not a burden on the community. It's an asset to the community, and it doesn't take the other, the economics of the community, the earning power of the community down. It empowers our community to be stronger, and of course, the future build too. Right? So.
And having been a teacher that taught in a portable, it's not the best thing for kids at all to have to be in a portable. If for some reason this doesn't go, I really feel like we need to look towards it, that it's going to go, and that students, teachers, the community as well will see a difference in having that new school. I mean, it's going to basically spread a lot of the two that are really full right now are going to be able to go. And I agree with the CTE. I was kind of leaning towards maybe lowering it, but when I saw the difference between the 102 and the 115, the $13, I felt like that's something that we could do, get by.
Mhm.
doing. So, that's, yeah. I thought long and hard about this because that's a big amount. And, in the community, I hate to see that it's growing the way it is, but that's just because I've lived here all my life and it's phenomenal growth compared to what I've seen earlier on. And we have to be ready.
Yeah. And I agree that there's just no discussion we have to have in elementary school. That's just, I think that's obvious to most everybody I talk to, but the CTE program, it's a way of extending the life of our current high school. A new high school is what, 80, 85 million. And so a CTE program would be much cheaper than that. And what I see, like the differences fundamentally now from say 35, 40 years ago when I was at Middleton High School was back then half the kids went to college. It was a lot more academic, college prep kind of classes, and there's different philosophies. And now, you have the student loan crisis. You have an incredibly high cost of going to colleges, and a shortage of, like Jake was talking about, a real shortage of young people that have actual marketable skills. And that is just so critical. And everybody that I know in the community, I just love to see, a pool of applicants that actually have skills that they can use in our community. We're a farm community, diesel mechanic skills, auto mechanic skills, truck driving, whatever. A lot of things that would just be so incredibly helpful, and the cost really isn't that much, and it just seems like a no-brainer to me. I'm just so supportive of all this, and I'm happy I really want to have some sort of open house at my place to kind of educate people and really encourage them to do this, because it is, like the attorney said, it's going to be hard to have language on the ballot that would really explain how we're just kind of replacing the old bond without it being problematic. And we have to meet with these people and explain to them we're pretty much just replacing the old bond. So
if I could mention a couple things. One, to your question, Jake, 8,441 homes is what our in our district. Yes. During the 2021 taxing year. So, that's, ending December 2021. A couple of questions that have come up as well. Just questions regarding the, if we pass, and I'll kind of give what I would say my answer would be, but it's not just me, it's as a board. So if there's other thoughts you have, if we were to pass these bonds, would we be essentially satisfied in saying that, for the next 20 years, we wouldn't have to ask for anything else? And I think, to me, I couldn't say that was the case by any means. It wouldn't be like, absolutely, we're going to, but I think it's, once you get into that situation, it's looking at what's available, what the community could support, what we're able to, handle in terms of numbers. One of the reasons for the CTE is kind of that hit a lot of different goals. But besides the programming that it brings in, which is tremendously valuable for students, it does provide at our next level where we're going to see is at middle school.
Yeah.
It provides the opportunity to have an additional 12 to 15 classrooms, depending on how we manage that. That would be available space now for middle school classrooms, thus pushing off the immediate need to discuss a bond for a middle school or high school. And the same with the high school. Having students leave the high school to come and take classes during the day, every period they leave a class, it's creating capacity at the high school, providing additional space that we can then use to help with those programs. So those are some of the things that I would look at in terms of that question of, would we be satisfied? And I don't know that the word satisfied is right, except that we would have to face whatever needs come.
I think it's hard to project, right? I mean, we just don't know. We don't know what the growth of the community is. And honestly, the school has very little control over it, right? Our responsibility is to educate kids, right? We can't issue, we can't levy any impact fees. That's limited by the legislature, and we are excluded from that. We can't approve or disapprove building permits, and we can't stand in the way of them being. So unfortunately, it has more to do with City Hall than us as to whether or not we could say that, because it's an infrastructure issue. If they keep cramming more houses in there, it's still our responsibility to educate kids and give them a good education, not just play babysitter, for the day, right? So it'd be hard. No, I couldn't for sure say that we would never ask for another thing for another 20 years.
Yeah.
Because we don't have control over it. The only thing we have control over is making sure the kids have the best education possible and getting them into the workforce as useful as possible so that they're contributing members to the tax base that helps take care of things. I mean, right now we're kind of in a weird chicken egg situation, which comes first? Do we just let it suffer? And no, I mean, we can't. It's our responsibility to do our best for this, but then again, do we go nuts and we've got $150 million we can levy? No, that doesn't make good fiscal sense at all. Like we just have to take it as it comes and try to manage it as carefully as possible and be good stewards of our tax monies and our patrons' tax money.
Another question along those lines is that if this bond didn't pass, how many times would we be asking? And I think from my perspective, it wouldn't be so much about how many times, it would be what information do we need to get from our community to adjust our plan?
Yes.
If it didn't pass this time, I would expect that we would it'd be our responsibility to go to the community and find out what was the biggest drawback. Why didn't they pass it? Was it the CTE? Was it the size of the school? Was it this? Because we've done a lot of work in advance of this to try and get at what's important. And why, I mean, the reason the CTE came up at all was because that was an ask from our patrons as we went through those surveys. So if it didn't pass, this was our attempt to meet those needs, then we would need to go back and have that conversation. Because in my mind, it's not going back and asking for the same thing. It's saying, okay, what was it about it? What did we miss? Where do we need to adjust? Because the patrons have now spoken. They've had their opportunity to speak through that election. And if it didn't pass, I think then that's what we'd go back and say, what's our next plan? And then having input from our community would be an important part.
But kicking the can down the road also ends up adding another $3, $4, $5 million to meeting the same solution, because we still have the same problem.
Right.
Growing community without enough infrastructure to service it.
Well, we have a worse problem.
Right.
Because now we have the influx in the community, and now what are we gonna do to put the Band-Aid on what we currently have, because we're already over capacity.
Portables are hard to get.
Well, yeah, and then, so now we put a Band-Aid on it with portables, and then we go down the road and say, okay, well, what can we do now for this amount of time? When in reality, I mean, we need a middle school, we all know that. We're jam-packed, we're busting at the seams with the middle schools. The CTE part of it not only will help in the middle school process, but we aren't even talking about the high school.
Yeah.
Okay, the high school's gonna grow too at the same time.
Everything
Now,
that's in the middle school is gonna go to high school.
and they're all gonna go to the high school. Well, now we're gonna have the same problem with the high school. CTE takes a lot of that burden off the high school, right off the get-go, because we're not at capacity at the high school as of yet.
Right.
85%, correct?
Yeah, and we've got room to be able to function and funnel those middle school kids up to the high school by at the same time moving and having those CTE programs and stuff like that takes pressure off the high school. So we're not going back 4 years, 5 years down the road. Now we need 85 million for a new high school because now we're way over capacity
Mhm.
and go that route. That's why
And it's hard to retain staff when you are packed,
Oh,
jam-packed. I
100%.
think it's been hard on some of our teachers.
I think the CTE is equally as important as the middle schools.
And then the last question is just plans for the supplemental levy. In my estimate, unless the state were to come with additional funding, because that supplemental levy really shores up a shortfall in funding from the state to do the programs we'd be looking at. My feeling would be that supplemental levy we would continue to ask of that supplemental levy unless the state were to come up with a significant amount of additional funding that we wouldn't then have to need that. But I don't foresee anything that come in my view or anything that going down the road that would be looking at increasing the amount of that supplemental.
Consistent over the last
We have
quite a few years. Not
So
changing.
that would be my perspective, but that was another question
That's a good question. That's fair.
And I think these are good questions that I feel will be important to put as part of our frequently asked questions on our website so that other people who have those similar questions can know kind of where we're at. But that is all that I have. And I handed you, when it comes to time, if there is a motion that the board would like to make, there's a wording there that I handed.
That's what that is?
Yeah, that's what that is.
Who wants it?
But that, obviously for another point, but any other questions from you as a board?
No, I appreciate that. It's hard. It's a hard time to ask for that, but we are also in desperate need, I think, for just to keep moving forward and keep it a good school district. I think it's important. So thank you, everyone, for your input. Let's move on to our policy review.
So the first policy
Thank you.
addresses class size. And so through the negotiations this year, we added some language to the negotiated agreement. And so I just wanted to reference that so that you know why we're looking at an adjustment in this policy. So this language was added and it specifically references really the recommended class size and the overcrowding at different grade levels. And so when we go back to our current policy, as you guys look at it, and we left it just as the current policy for now, we don't have any overcrowded or overloaded numbers in our current policy for grades 6 through 12. So we need to come and present those to you at the second reading and say, this is what we would propose those overload numbers look like, and then look at some of our specialty areas as well. And so that's the recommendation that we're gonna ask to move forward with, is we need to look at some of these numbers and adjust based off of that new language in the negotiated agreement too.
Yeah.
So currently, there's no changes to this, but we just wanted to start the process, start the conversation. We'll bring numbers back to you at the second reading and share with you kind of where we're at.
We'll have second reading in July.
Yes.
I just in reading this, I'm just curious as to when it says strive to achieve the ratios consistent with the state class size ratio goals, if 20 is where they want to stay, why do we get to 26?
That's a lot of first graders.
It's a lot of kindergartners and first graders. And then 28 in second and third. So I guess you're gonna look at that and
What do you
adjust?
want?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so when we look at that 20 number, when the state tells us 20, yes, Idaho code says those are our goals. But then when they go to fund us, they don't fund us on 20. They fund us on a different amount.
Probably
And so
like 10. No, I'm
ideally-
just kidding. Yes,
No,
yes.
they're gonna fund us at more students per teacher than 20.
Okay,
And so when we look at that, ideally, yes, we would really like to stay here, but then most of that is driven by funding and where we can adjust and make that work. And so that's where we worked with our teachers union to come up with like this 26, 28, 32 as really those overloaded numbers. When we get to that spot, we need to start some problem solving conversations. We need to really look at, do we need to add a paraprofessional? Do we need to look at adding another FTE? What are our options when we get to those numbers so that we don't exceed those without offering support? And so we just really want to come up and work with them to decide what does that number look like, grades 6 through 12.
okay.
Because the state ratio you can see is 160 per teacher. Well, you divide that by 6 periods depending on their caseload, it's closer to 30, but we need to figure out, is that comfortable, knowing that some of our class sizes obviously are 35,
Well,
38?
and sometimes when you let them get to that 26, 28, it's way past time of adding someone.
Mhm.
I mean, it should be once it starts, deciding on how many kids that are added, should we be adding
Mhm.
a para to help or a aide to
Right.
come in?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's why we also added that language and agreed to the language in the negotiated agreement this year where there's a monetary value for if they're overloaded and we don't get it addressed in a certain time frame, they're gonna
I
receive
saw that.
a dollar amount for those months that go by that we can't hire somebody to get in there to support them as well.
And they negotiated that with you? Okay.
We went through different iterations of where we landed, but that final one is what
Okay.
we've all agreed to move forward with for next year.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that one? Okay, so the next one we wanted to bring forward for a first reading is our student health physical screening examinations. Really, if you look at this sentence right here, parent guardians will receive a written notice of any screening only if there's an indication of a condition. We really want to make sure we're informing parent guardians of any screenings that we're doing. And so we want to eliminate that, make sure that on the forefront, we're letting parents know these are the screenings we offer, give them the opportunity to opt out if they don't want their student to participate in it, and then move forward with the screening from there. And so we're just adjusting that language and that process as we move into next fall to have that option for parents to opt out, be communicated to on the front end of it instead of the back end of it.
And we'll be waiting for an actual permission slip before we test anything. We're not just assuming that they don't opt
Gotcha.
out if they don't say something. It's, no, you've got to have that permission slip in. And then once we have that, we can go forward with the screening.
And so the language we did adjust here, you'll see it's highlighted and then scratched out what we would remove. This would be what we would propose to move forward to the second reading. And then if you guys have questions or adjustments you want us to make from there, we can as well.
Will we take action on that to move it to a second reading
Yeah, just so. Yes.
on both of them, right?
Yep.
Each individually.
Yeah, well, if they're both going to second reading, you can do them together.
All right, I would entertain a motion to move those policies to a second reading.
You have to do it individually.
You
just
can lump it together, you said?
Because they're both going to a second reading, unless you wanted to do something different.
That's the class size read, the class size and the,
Just say, I'd say policy 2240 and policy 23500.
I move that we move policy 2240, class size, and policy 3500, the student health physical screenings / examinations, to a second reading.
There's a second.
I second that.
All those in favor, say aye.
I,
All right,
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to possible action items. I would entertain a motion to approve or deny the MHS and MMS new supplemental curriculum. Those new
I
classes.
move to approve the MHS and MMS new supplemental curriculum.
Is there a second?
second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Item B, approve or deny 2022-2023 school handbooks.
And you'll just need to mention each
Yep.
school there.
Yep. I would entertain a motion for that.
Looking at the approving or denying the handbooks, I motion that we approve the Mill Creek, Purple Sage, Middleton Middle School, and Middleton Academy handbooks.
I second that.
Look at you.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.
Aye, oh, sorry.
You're okay. Let's go to C. I would entertain a motion to approve or deny 2022-2023 and negotiated agreements.
I move that we approve the 2022-2023 negotiated agreement.
There's a
second that.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Am I going too fast, Gina? Okay, good. Just making sure. And I would entertain a motion to approve or deny the August 30 bond resolution.
I make a motion that we approve a resolution calling a special election to be held for the purpose of submitting to the qualified electors of school district number 134, Canyon County, state of Idaho, a proposition relating to the issuance of up to 59,435,000 general obligation school bonds of school district number 134, Canyon County, state of Idaho, and in providing for the issuance of such bonds, the levy a tax to pay such bonds.
Do I have,
Second that.
thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. We are adjourned.
It's a good 2 hours.